Hello. You are listening to the Grieving Parents Sharing Hope podcast. We are here to walk with parents on their unwanted journey of child loss, guiding them to a place of hope, light, and purpose, not in spite of their child's death, but as a way to honor his or her life. And now, here is your host, author, speaker, and bereaved parent, Laura Diehl.
Hi, today's episode is with another guest. Today you will be hearing me talk to a dad, Clint Hatton. Clint is an author, motivational speaker, personal development and leadership coach, and the founder of Big, Bold, Brave in McKinney, Texas. Clint recently published his first book, Big, Bold, Brave, How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. It was inspired by the way his oldest son lived his life. Gabriel achieved his goal of becoming a licensed pilot at the age of 17. He died in a tragic plane crash while living his dream just shy of his 18th birthday. His legacy is carried on by the Hatton family. I'm not going to share anything else at this point, except to remind you that my recording studio is the Hope Mobile, so you get to hear whatever is going on in my background. So with that, Dave, let's play my fascinating talk with Clint. Well, hi, Clint. Thank you for joining me and my listeners today. I'm very glad to have you here with me.
Hi, Laura. I'm glad to be with you too. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, we had to reschedule this once. I think it was on my end, but we're together now. So I always like to start out with asking our guests how they became part of this unwanted club that has a lifelong membership. So, Clint, can you please share Gabriel and your story with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you frame that, because that's how I often describe it as well. It's a club that nobody ever wants to join, didn't choose to join, but you find yourself being a part of it. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, our story started a little over 3 years ago. And effectively what happened was my oldest son, I have 3 boys. I've been married almost 20 years to my beautiful bride, and 3 boys. Gabriel was the oldest. And from a very early age, he had a passion to become a pilot. He went up in a small plane with his uncle Danny when he was like 8 years old and just never let go of it. He just had it in his veins almost instantly. And so, like a lot of parents, we didn't know if that was going to fade at some point, if he, want to be an NFL player or, a CEO or something, a week later, but he held on to it. And so, one of the things that we felt was really important for our kids is to, any dreams that they had that, were really in their heart, we want to be able to support that. So, by the time he was 14, he entered into, which was his freshman year, he entered into a 4-year aviation program on the educational side of things that we happen to have here in the school district we're in near Dallas. And then on top of that, he joined a club called Tango 31 Aero Club. And it's a small airport club that was founded by a gentleman who just had a love for teenagers. It was all for teenagers that had a passion for the aviation industry, whether they wanted to be a mechanic or whether they wanted to be a pilot. And so he joined that. And to kind of shorten the story, the only way you were ever going to get to fly was through sweat equity. So he worked really hard. They did all kinds of stuff. They painted planes. They did oil changes. Eventually they got to where they did complete overhauls, and just about anything you can imagine that would be done with a plane, he taught them. And then by the time he was 16, he was old enough to have the opportunity to start going up with a flight instructor. So he started his dream of flying. And actually, I like to share this part because I always found it so kind of surreal, but he actually soloed, Laura, before he even had his driver's license. So that was as a parent, that was kind of a strange thing. But anyway, so he started flying, and just took to it, really quickly, and was really good, actually. And so by the time he was 17 years old, which is the youngest you can be and actually even apply for a private pilot's license. So at 17, he studied, this book that, is about 8 inches thick, and took the written exam and passed it the first time, and went up on his check ride and passed that the first time. And boom, he did his dream of becoming a licensed pilot. so he was on his way, and life was good, and it was exciting, and just, I mean, we all have ups and downs and bumps and bruises along the way, right? But all in all, we just felt like, gosh, things were just great for him, and the world was his oyster, if I could say it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then on September 23rd of 2019, he was on a trip. He had a friend, a really good, dear friend of his, that she was needing to get back to the University of Arkansas, which is, a couple hours north of us, in a plane. And so he needed the hour. So he, jumped in, took her up there. They arrived safely. Everything was good. And then on the return trip, he was about 20 minutes out of Fayetteville and went through a little mountainous region. And ultimately, the NTSB is the one who does the investigations for all plane crashes of every kind.
Okay.
And it took 2 years to get that report, which is
Oh
kind of
my.
agonizing. That's typical. We knew that was going to happen,
Oh
but
wow.
they ruled that he suffered from spatial disorientation, which is one of the most common things that can happen to a pilot, and especially that ends in, a death. Your listeners are probably familiar with it, even if they don't know the term, because Kobe Bryant, the famous basketball player,
Mm-hmm.
is helicopter pilot. That's what they ruled in that crash as well. So, he had a multi-million dollar aircraft and was,
Mm.
much more experienced, and it still happened to
Right,
him.
right.
So it happened, and he lost his life chasing his
Mm.
dream. And so we instantly, as you well know, in an instant, our world came, no pun intended, crashing down, and we were
Mm.
suddenly in a club we never wanted to join.
Wow. And he was still 17 or was he 18 by then?
He was about 3 months shy of his 18th birthday.
Wow. That's quite the story. And I think that's one of those things that you could just torment yourself with all the what ifs and the whys on helping him follow his dream and to be able to be doing something like that at such a young age.
Yeah.
Wow, boy, you could really send yourself spiraling down into darkness on that one, blaming yourself for something that was just helping him follow his dream. So,
Yeah.
Clint, yeah, I know the next morning, the very next morning, you had the extremely painful task of telling your other two boys what had happened to their older brother. And you knew immediately that you needed some sort of an anchor for you and for your family, which meant making some decisions right then and there while you were all sitting together in this shocking pain. Can you share with us what your conversation with them was like?
Yes, I would love to do that. And then I have a comment on what you just said too, because I think that was obviously a very powerful observation, because it is something that you could have really gone down a spiral just thinking on the what if. So I'm hoping we can come back to that.
Okay.
But
Yep.
I think, Laura, for us, just because of how sensitive this topic is and the pain that I still feel, and I'm sure you still feel, and many of your
Mm-hmm.
listeners, I want to be really sensitive before I start out on this, because I do think, I was a pastor for 17 years, have helped a lot of people with a lot of different types of loss and pain over the years, including, losing a child, losing a loved one. And so I do feel like I had a little bit of an advantage that not everybody does. And what I mean by that, not with the pain. There
Right.
is no advantage for the
Right.
pain.
Right. Yes.
It was devastating
Mm-hmm.
and is devastating. But I do feel like I had the advantage in the sense that, I had seen and in some cases personally tried to walk through a situation like this, not a plane crash, but, losing someone
Mm-hmm.
suddenly. And I just, over the years, just saw some patterns and some things that ultimately I think just didn't serve them very well and kind of led
Mm-hmm.
them to going down that spiral. And in some cases, as you know, it's a devastating blow for everyone. And you see marriages sometimes not make it. You
Mm-hmm.
see families, with extended, if it's like we have two other boys. So
Mm-hmm.
those situations where things don't go well,
Right.
so I think I wanted to start with that just because I don't think it was just what I'm about to share that I think were a couple of really healthy things we did, but it was also an awareness that when we talk about these things,
Mm-hmm.
how important and how intentional we were going to have to be, because
Right.
it was still going to be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So with that foundation, the morning, it happened, the boys, Joel and Liam are my two other boys. They're now 18 and 13, but they were 9 and 14 at the time. They slept through the night. We did not wake them up. It was a long, hellish night for us,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to find out. We knew it around 8 o'clock that night he went down. And it wasn't until roughly 3:30 in the morning that we
Mm-hmm.
got the official word from the coroner. And
Wow.
I'm sharing your listeners a lot of ebbs and flows, a lot of
Sure.
confusion on the information we were getting and all that stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately at 3:30, it was official that he was definitely gone. And our prayers for
Right.
that were no longer
Mm-hmm.
valid. So we let them sleep, and I think that gave me a little bit of time too to just weep and talk it through with my wife. My in-laws actually drove all the way from where they live. They live about an hour away, so they were already here in our home by the time the boys got up too.
Mm.
So when we sat down, I just, at that point, being very candid with you, Laura, I wasn't in a moment
Yes.
of prayer. Like, I didn't say, okay, boys, let's pray first. um
Right.
and
Uh-huh.
the reason I bring that up is we'd been praying all night.
Sure.
you know we were praying and declaring scriptures and worshiping and doing all that stuff throughout the night.
Mm-hmm.
So I just felt like the Lord met me in that real deep, searing, shocking pain of the
Mm.
initial news. And I really felt like he gave me the guide. The compass
Mm.
is the word I've been using most.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I said, okay, boys, I said, here's how we're going to live this out. We only, in my experience, we only have two choices. We can choose to focus on the tragedy of it, the crash itself, that he died, flying a plane, and then all of the other obvious things that, you're going to miss birthdays and holidays and
Mm-hmm. Right.
milestones and all those things. And not that we weren't going to feel through those, because we do
Oh
every single
yeah.
time they come around. But I just said, if our focus is on the tragedy, then we are going to be shadows of who we were created to be, and we're probably going to struggle.
Mm.
But I think there's a second choice. And the second choice is we're going to choose life. And what that meant for me, because, as believers, we're all familiar with the scripture, choose life or death or whatever.
Right.
But what that meant to me, Laura, was I said, we are going to choose to honor the way he lived.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we're not going to think about the tragedy, not that we're never going to think about the crash or anything, because that's
Mm-hmm.
nonsense. Of course we will.
Right. Right.
But we're going to keep our focus on celebrating how he lived his life, because he attacked life. He was adventurous. I joke now. People are enamored with t-shirts with sayings on it, right? And if
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna make one for him, it would have been "What's next?" Because that's just how he
Ah.
was.
Uh-huh.
Everything was an adventure. Anything he wanted to do, he was gonna make it happen. And so I just told him, I said, the only way we can really honor him truly,
Mm-hmm.
and God, is
Yes.
to live our lives the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Not
And
doing the things he did, but
right, right.
just really living life to the fullest.
Right. And that sounds so easy, but it's not, is it? I
Right.
mean, it's like you
No,
have to make
no.
that choice and that decision over and over again. It wasn't just a one-time
Right.
decision. And I look at it in a sense that so often as parents, we get stuck in the tragedy of our child's death. And we forget that that was a moment in time. It was a horrible moment
Yeah.
in time. But before that moment in time, they had a life. And Gabriel had almost 18 years of life. My daughter had 29 years of
Right.
life. Some had 36, some had 6, 3. Some didn't even have life outside the womb.
Right.
But there
Which we've
was
experienced as
life.
well. Yeah.
But there
Yeah.
was life. And so to make that choice to live in a way that honors our child's life really can make a difference. Now, let's go ahead and circle back to that, talking about that spiraling down. If we just, I mean, we
Mm.
can beat ourselves up with blaming ourselves, and we know where that comes from. That's The enemy, we're in such
Sure.
a dark,
Yeah.
vulnerable place. The enemy's going to do anything he can to keep us sucked into his darkness. So how do you battle that? How do you fight that?
Well, I think there was a part two to that morning, because as you very accurately described, just because we said we were going to choose life didn't mean that, oh no, this is going to be a
Mm-hmm.
cakewalk. It wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't. So part two that morning was is I basically we made a pact as a family. I said, boys, the other side of this situation we find ourselves in is none of us know, me included, what grieving is going to be like. We're not going to know from day to day, and probably early on, and even hour to hour, when we're going to
Mm-hmm.
feel really sad, when we're going to feel angry, when we're going to potentially be on the verge of fighting depression, whatever
Mm-hmm.
those emotions were that would come. And eventually they all come. And so I said, so here's how we're going to handle that. We're going to agree that we are going to do this together as a family. And what that's going to look like is no matter what any one of us at any given time is feeling, it's okay. And so, if it's me and I'm
Mm-hmm.
feeling sad and I'm crying, I'm going to cry, or
Mm-hmm.
mom is going to cry. And we're not going to try and, hold each other. Like so often you sometimes see, and I see this a lot with other believers at times where they don't want somebody to feel the pain. So they'll, hold on and say, oh, don't cry, don't cry.
Right.
It's
It's
going to be okay. It's going to be
okay.
okay. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, yeah, yeah. And it's very well meaning. I don't believe anybody
Right.
that does that is mean spirited by any stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just not helpful because you really need to be able to process through those emotions.
Yes.
So we agreed on that, Laura, and I think that was huge. And I told them, even though they were only 9 and 14 at the time, I really felt like they needed to the level that they could at their age of maturity be
Mm-hmm.
a part of that, and it wasn't a one-way street. So
Mm-hmm.
specifically I said, listen, so if you're feeling whatever you're feeling any given day, you
Mm-hmm.
need to know it's okay, and we can talk through it, even if you're angry, even, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to know we're going to do the same thing. And Emerald and I agreed to do that. It wasn't a one-way street where, okay, boys, you need to do that, but then we're never going to show you what we're going through. We're going to go behind closed
Right.
doors and cry there so you don't know what we're doing, and try
Mm-hmm.
to look strong, especially as the man.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how we walk this out. So again, to your point earlier, this was no perfect thing. We're not perfect. And so, there was some times where maybe one of us went a couple of days or a week and carried something on our own for a little bit, trying to process through it. But we got to where we were really good at asking what I like to now call courageous conversations, which is, in a case like this, the willingness to ask that hard question, are you okay today?
Mm.
And not assume you know the answer,
Right.
because as we know, we can hide it sometimes. Sometimes we may look like we're happy go lucky,
Oh
and on
yeah,
the
we're
inside,
really good at that.
yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. So we did that too. And so I think I can't remember how you said it a minute ago, but really the reason why I think that's been such a healthy process and has worked for us is because there are challenges, and we do fall, and we do have hard times and hard days, but it just gave us something to quickly recalibrate back to our original intention of, but we're going to choose life. We're going to live, we're going to live for Gabriel by living ourselves. So it was something that just would kind of take us, back to where we needed to be. And then, to address your question of that potential spiral and the big why question, right? Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
question that everybody has to face on some level.
Right.
The thought's going to occur to you, why
Mm-hmm.
me? That's just human nature. But I think, and I'm glad we're having this conversation that I'm 3 years down or 3+ years down the road, because I think I have better language for it now
Mm-hmm.
than I did. Because for me, and I'm only speaking for me personally, I didn't really have a lot of battles with why. And my reasoning for that is simply, you know, without going into, too much detail to get off in the weeds on how he became a pilot, there was a lot of prayer that went into that. There was a lot of favor that went into that.
Mm.
We didn't even have the money. I mean, it can cost ten,
Oh, I was
fifteen
thinking
thousand
of that
dollars
while
or
you were
more.
actually talking. I'm
Yeah,
thinking, oh wow. Yeah, I did have that thought. Hmm.
absolutely. And we didn't have that kind of money at that time. And so, there was a lot of favor involved. And he ended up finding this club. And ultimately, just to give you an idea, he earned his own $1,000 scholarship from an American airline scholarship for teenagers. And then with all the things that Kevin, his mentor, put in place for that club, he had volunteer flight instructors.
Mm,
They got their fuel at wholesale. I mean, there was
wow.
there was companies that donated certain things because it
Hmm.
was a club for kids.
Yeah.
We literally only spent a little over $300 out of our own pocket, and that was
Wow.
just for his exam.
Wow.
So my point is that there was a lot of favor that went into him even being able to get in a plane, let alone eventually earn and start flying and literally living his dream.
Hmm.
So for me, the one thing I've seen that's happened over the years, and I just refuse it in my own life, not just in this situation, but
Hmm.
any situation. We knew God had opened the doors for him to do that. So to
Right.
change the narrative now because we lost him, and then
Hmm.
start to second guess ourselves and blame ourselves or the mentor or
Hmm.
whoever else, would have been completely revisionist history,
Hmm.
in my opinion.
Right.
So that part I didn't really struggle with, but there were a few times, and I know my wife and I have had this conversation where she probably struggled with the question why a little bit more. And so my new language for it is just this, and it's just a question, and I would pose it to any of your listeners, in the most delicate, sincere way, just to consider this if you're still struggling with why. When I think of asking the question why for losing my son, tell me what answer is sufficient.
Exactly.
For me, there isn't an
Hmm.
answer on this side of eternity that's good enough.
I 100% agree. And the Lord showed me several years ago, when our child asks us why, if we said no to something, they're not asking why because they want to know the answer. They want to know why so that they can argue with you why your reason isn't good enough. If you were to give them a reason why, they're not like, oh, thank you, mom. Thank you, dad. I understand. And they go on their merry way. They want to argue. Our why isn't good enough. I think it's the same thing with God. If he were to tell us why in our finite minds here on this earth, without our view of eternity, without God's, full picture, it's not a good enough reason. The answer to our why is not going to give us peace, is it?
No, and so that's, for me, it really does kind of end there, is so because then I think there's a follow-up question, if I were to allow why to still be there and be something that just continues to beat me up and keep me locked,
Hmm.
is if there's no answer that's sufficient, then why am I still asking that question?
Hmm. That's a good point. That's a really good point. But there's something that some parents just have a hard time turning that corner. And I wonder if some of it is goes back to those first couple of things that you kind of set in place that very within the first 24 hours when Gabriel passed, the whole thing of choosing to stay stuck in the death, in the moment of death and that event, or choosing life and choosing, no matter what this grief looks like, that we're going to continue to choose life. It's not that we're not going to grieve.
Right.
Because I think of so many parents, even as you were talking, I could hear some parents, just because I hear from so many through emails and correspondence and things. You're talking about, you only paid out of your own pocket $300 for this extremely expensive hobby. Okay. And could have been a career of his. I mean, we
Right.
don't know at this point. And I just hear parents saying, so you're like glad, you're saying you're blessed that you only had to pay $300 for your son to die. I mean,
Sure.
that's just where that darkness takes us, to that
Sure.
kind of anger and bitterness.
Right. No, I mean, I totally understand that question. And even if somebody said that, to my face, I wouldn't be offended by it. I understand, where that
Hmm.
comes from. But again, for us, it goes back to the value system that we've chosen. And that is no, it was $300 that allowed him to live his life to the fullest while he was here. Yeah,
Right.
for us, it really is that simple. But again, I mean, you made the point. I think sometimes when we're talking about this kind of a question, or, how we view it, the thought process there is that somehow that's, equal to how much or how little pain we're going to experience.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the point at all.
Right.
We've got plenty of pain, but we have found, one of the things I talk about a lot now is finding a way to give your pain a purpose.
That's
And I'm
exactly what
certainly
I was
not the
going to
one that
ask you
coined that
next.
phrase,
So,
but
yeah, go for that. Yes, I
yeah,
was going to
yeah,
ask you that
yeah,
next.
yeah. Ultimately what ended up happening, for me, and then I'll share a little bit, because Amaryllis's expression of it is, a little bit different than mine. So I'll quickly get into that. Another thing that happened that morning of was we were contacted by local news media. There was a couple of TV stations. One was the local NBC affiliate that wanted to see if we would do an interview, about his story. And of
Can I
course,
ask you,
again, this is the
yeah,
morning.
what was
Yeah,
your reaction to that? I mean, how did you honestly
no.
feel? Okay,
The
okay.
answer was no.
Because I know you
Yeah,
did, and
yeah,
it's like,
yeah. I
how do
mean,
you do that? Do you just numb
I did.
yourself to
Yeah.
it?
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Well, so the context I laid, if everybody listening to this can just kind of keep the context we've already laid with how we started out that morning with
Okay.
choosing life
Mm-hmm.
and living for him, just keep that in the back of your mind, because the truth was, when she called this particular one with NBC, when she called me, and she was very sweet, very kind. So, this wasn't some, I don't know, Maury Povich moment or whatever, where you're talking to
Mm-hmm.
somebody who's super insensitive. She was very sensitive, and she was a believer.
Mm.
But we were devastated. And
Yeah.
so I just felt like there was no possible way that we could make it through an interview. So my
Right.
answer was no.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately what happened is, at the end of that call, she said, well, she goes, can I just say this one last thing? And I want you to just think about it. Just think about it. Is we're going to, I have to do a report on this story tonight. It's an assignment.
Mm.
If I do it without talking to you guys tonight, it's really nothing. It's not going to be anything more than just reporting how he died.
Mm.
If you'll let me, and I'll come over to your house,
Mm.
I'll walk you through it. We can go slow. I'll let you tell the story the way you want to tell it. And you can even include as much as your faith as you want to bring into it.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so I just said thank you and hung up. And the answer was still no.
Mm-hmm.
But then we ended up in a conversation. By then, my other father-in-law was here as well. And so we all sat there as a family, and I just kind of explained the conversation, because, I didn't have it on speakerphone. And he was the one that was the most surprising for a few different reasons, which we don't need to get into, but I would have thought he was like, no way.
Mm-hmm.
But he looked at me and he said, listen, you guys have talked about this morning about how you want to honor how he lived, and you want to choose to focus on how he lived. He says, I know this would be really hard, but it seems like this is your first opportunity to do that.
Mm.
And I knew he was right, but it was really hard. And
Yeah.
so, we did, obviously, we did agree to do the interview. And she was amazing. She did her name was Katie, and she did a really beautiful job of just being delicate with the situation itself. But ultimately what came out of that, Laura, because the act of actually doing the interview was a complete blur, as you can imagine.
Mm. Yeah.
When she left, I couldn't even begin to tell you what we even talked about.
Ugh.
It was, and we weren't a mess through the whole time. There were parts where we had to stop, but it was just a blur.
Mm-hmm.
But what ended up happening is, she did the segment, and we watched it that night on the news, because we wanted to see,
Yeah.
did she follow through and all that. And it was about a 3-minute segment, and really beautifully done. It really, did a really honorable job, as much as you can cram the life of a almost
Right.
18-year-old kid into just a couple of minutes or so. But, did a beautiful job of that, represented our faith in a really true way. And then what was interesting was at the end, apparently during the interview, I had said something along the lines of, Gabriel lived big, bold, and brave. I don't remember saying it. As I said, it was a total blur.
Mm-hmm.
But when the segment aired, at the end of it, she didn't choose to use the video portion of me saying that. Instead, she did a voiceover to close out the segment. And she said, Gabriel's parents encourage you to live your life like Gabriel, big, bold, and brave. And so there, when hearing it back to me, there was something on that phrase. And so, it was in an instant, it felt like it had life on it,
Hmm.
to put it in the
Mm-hmm.
simplest terms. Now, my personal development company is now called Big Bold Brave. The book is called Big Bold Brave. None of that came on the radar. It wasn't the next week that I'm thinking, okay,
Right.
now I've got, none of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a family mantra. Again, just another tool
Hmm.
to when we were feeling down, when we were feeling like we didn't want to get out of bed or didn't want to go to work or didn't want to eat or whatever, because all those things happen.
Mm-hmm.
It was just another tool. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and we didn't walk around every day going, big, bold, brave, big, bold, brave. But, from time to time we would say,
Mm-hmm.
you know what? We're going to live like Gabriel, big, bold, brave, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
so it was just another, again, tool that helped us. And then, eventually after several months, I began to really feel like there was maybe something more to it. Ultimately, I didn't start writing the book until it had been a little after 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But, part of the reason why I wrote it when I did, and this is not a direct comparison by any stretch, but COVID, the world got hit by the
Yeah.
pandemic
Yes.
months after Gabriel died. So we had, him and then COVID. Now for us, and I'm not, this is not a political statement at all, but for us, COVID was, are you kidding me? We lost our son, and I
Right.
know it was
Right.
real. And I know people who lost family, and I'm very sensitive to that. But for us, we already took the biggest blow
Right.
we were ever going to take.
Yes.
So honestly, COVID was not our biggest pain, but certainly recognized over the next 2 years just how much people have suffered. And many suffered loss of a loved one,
Yes.
or
Mm-hmm.
they lost other things that are not equal, but losing careers or marriages that imploded, and
Right.
just a lot of different forms
Mm-hmm.
of meaningful loss. So that's why I ended up writing the book when I did, because this is a book that certainly covers what I think are some really important keys to, our grieving process in general. And it's not like we're over it, it's only been three
Right.
years, but
Right.
it's what we use, um, on sometimes a daily basis. But I wanted to write something that would bring people hope and help them work through fears of all kinds and just all the things that were unleashed on our planet, during these last couple of years. So the book is really more a manual for life and just getting through all kinds of ups and downs, because that's what I feel like it is. Because at the end of the day, when when someone asks me, how did you guys get through it? It's not one thing. And it's not even
Right.
just the two things that we established that first morning. It's the
Mm-hmm.
value systems we've lived by for 20 plus years. It's mindsets that we have to recalibrate to because of what
Yes.
our beliefs tell us, things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
It's, yeah, the continual choice. And
Mhm.
it's like from day to day that whatever that choice is can be a totally different choice. We're
Right.
facing something totally different and we're making a totally different choice today to keep moving forward. Whatever that looks like. Sometimes moving forward
Exactly.
can just be moving from the couch to the bed.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and some
Yeah.
days moving forward is getting out shopping. Some days moving forward is I can actually talk to somebody and give them hope. So, I mean, it's every day it's different. And
Can I
you
say
did,
this real quick? Because
yes,
what
please.
you just
Hmm.
said to me is so huge. It's a play on words, but to me, you just said moving forward. To me, there's a massive difference between saying moving forward and moving on. And I
Yes.
know when people say moving on, they don't mean it necessarily this way, but moving on implies as if, well, that's just part of my life that's now in the past and it doesn't matter. That
Hmm.
we didn't move on
Right.
from Gabriel. There's a crater sized hole that nobody else will ever fill on this side of eternity.
Yes.
But we did move forward and that's why I love your wording.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, you mentioned that your wife was doing something too to give
Yeah.
purpose to her pain. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's some really, cool ebbs and flows to that story, even though, there's a part of our story that's, and it's painful. But ultimately, she had really discovered that she's a painter. She does some really cool different types of abstract art with various mediums. So she had discovered that gift probably a year, maybe two before Gabriel passed away, but had only done a couple of things, and it was mostly just, the occasional hobby. So, but she was really good. Really, she's amazing. So, but what ended up happening is when he passed away, she put down the paintbrushes and the paint for a while. It was probably, now I may be wrong on the math, but I want to say it was about 8 months. It was a little while. And so that was just something that was tough for her to pick up.
Sure.
And then ultimately what ended up happening was, and actually the conversation that she had with a friend happened like the day or two after he passed. There was a friend who felt like during they were either studying the word or they're in a time of worship. I'm sorry that I kind of forget the exact detail on that, but they felt like they saw this, like, call it a vision, call it whatever you want, but they felt like they saw this scene where Gabriel was with the angel Gabriel, and they were having a conversation about, being in heaven, and it was this beautiful scene, and the colors, and like there was gold and, all this stuff. So that was something that was expressed to her. And in that moment, because it was only a couple of days into what I call the shock and awe phase, that's what I call the really early stage.
Right.
It was really healing in the moment. Not healed and you're done, but healing in the moment, And so several months went by, and she decided, I feel like I'm going to paint something. And the inspiration was because her friend had written it down as well. There was something about what she felt like she saw. She's like, I'm going to try and put something on canvas. And what was crazy, Laura, because this has never happened since, and she's done a lot of commission pieces now. She's actually on the map now. She was actually invited to do a very big international show here in Dallas this last year, so it's really taken off. But at that time, she was still pretty new, and all she had painted was this background. So I know your listeners can't really see what that looked like, but just imagine it's literally just the base colors of a background, which were these beautiful blues and like a gold flake. And I leave the house and I go on like errands for like 2 hours, and she hadn't started on the rest of the painting yet, which hers are like a painting and a sculpture all in one. And so I came back 2 hours later, and I was just checking on her. And I said, "Baby, how you doing?" And she had this like stunned look on her face. And she said, "I think I'm done." I'm like, "What?" You're done? I'm like, "Okay, can I see it?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I wish I had a picture of it right now. It's the one piece of art that's never going to be for sale, and it's on our mantle.
Oh, sure.
But it's these beautiful, really textured angel wings with that blue and gold background. And of course they're white and it's shiny, and it's really, everybody's blown away when they see this particular painting. And it was just beautiful, and it was just, we really felt like it was God's, because again, her process hasn't been the same since. I mean, she's got to work at it, but she really felt like God was just really breathing and doing art with her, that day. And that's how she feels about it now. Every piece she does, every piece she does has deep meaning. It's got the scripture that goes along with it and all those things. But that is her art business is her version of giving her pain a purpose, and living big, bold, brave.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping this up. This has been so good, Clint. I just really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability. And also, I guess, just making sure that we all know that this is your path, because we're all on our own path.
Yep.
So I think you've given us some tools, but that doesn't mean these tools are going to work for everyone. So we just pray it through and keep going. This book, how can people find out more about it or connect with you? What can you leave with us so people can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could just say one quick thing to what you just said, because you're so right that not everybody's going to respond to the same thing. But I do want to say something I failed to say earlier. And that is that, there may be some that maybe didn't have the same reference point that I did
Yes.
to know that we need to have some things in place. And if you're listening, maybe this isn't the right tool, but you need to know it's not over for you, and you can absolutely start a new healing process and move into a new place, and God will help you with that. So you need to know, if you've been a year, 10 years or 20 years, it's not too late, and the Lord can help you, get to a healthier place if that's where you find yourself. As the book goes, that what I'd like to invite your listeners to do is on my website, which is big, bold, brave, all one word, .us. And for the sticklers out there, yes, I know it's .us, but I chose that domain really intentionally because for me, the vision of Big, Bold, Brave, the mission of Big, Bold, Brave is about us and collaborating with people. And so it's Big, Bold, Brave.us. There they can find, my corporate speaking engagements and things that I do in that realm. The coaching philosophy that I have, they can find the book there, of course. And then what I'd also encourage them to do is subscribe. This is new. I'm actually going to be coming out with a newsletter that I'm going to start publishing on the first Friday of February. And it'll just be once weekly. I'm just one of those people that hates clutter. So it's only going to be once weekly. And it's just going to be 3 very consistent things, not a ton of content, just one thing that's a free tool that can help you with something today. Some things I love, and then, updates on where the mission is going. So it's going to be real brief. I'd love for them to connect with me there as well.
Now, good. Now, when you say where the mission is going, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So for me, this is much more than, the book for me is a tool in 2 ways. One is it's something that's going to help a lot of people. And I've already, fortunately, the book launch isn't until the 1st, but it's actually been for sale for a little while. And there's a lot of people that read it. And I'm getting back incredible testimonies and And the interesting thing is that people that are getting healed from things outside of necessarily losing a loved one too, which has been interesting. But anyway, so that's my first, motive with the book. But the second is it's really, I want to create a movement. I want to create a movement of people who just refuse to allow, pain or loss or life's disappointments to, cripple them from being able to live a life that serves others and brings value to the world. And so, the book really spells that out.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you, does your wife have a website? Because I have a feeling some people might want to see her work. So what is her website? And I'll add that in the show notes as well.
Thank you. And I'll make sure you have that link because I will spell it out, but it's still not easy.
Okay.
Because her name is Amaryllis and almost everyone spells it wrong. So it's Art by Amaryllis, all one word. So Art, BYAMARILLYS. So artbyamaryllis.com.
Okay. All right. So
And I appreciate that. I really do.
Oh, yeah. So if you didn't get the spelling, just check with the show notes and click the link.
That's right. That's right. Easier to click than try and recall that one, right?
Yes, yes. So, Clint, do you have any last thoughts or words of encouragement for the listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I know, again, we know that we're all in a different space in time with, trying to process these deep losses. And so, one thing you need to know is wherever you are in it, there's no shame in anything, nothing.
Right.
I mean, one of the things that has been disappointing to me to see when I see certain people talk about grieving, they try to make it sound like it's some timetable with like the sand in the hourglass.
Right.
And then suddenly that sand just runs out and then you should be done by now,
And we can do that to ourselves too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just think that's incredibly unhealthy. I think it's incredibly untrue. For me, the goal has never been to eliminate the pain of grieving. I believe that we will always have a measure of pain, and I'm okay with that. And I actually embrace it because that pain represents the great love that I had for my son and the relationship that we had. So I would encourage your listeners, if your frustration or shame has been not getting rid of the pain, maybe it's the wrong metric. Maybe that's not really the goal. But if that pain has kept you from living your life and really, experiencing the other loved ones around you and the opportunities that maybe God has for you that it's kept you back, please do something new. If maybe you've reached out for a counselor, maybe call another one, maybe find a new one, maybe reach out to a pastor or get a coach or whatever it is. But I just encourage you, don't give up. There is life after this. It's not the same, but it can still bring you a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And I like to tell bereavers that your life can have meaning and purpose again. And that's not in spite of your child's death,
Right.
but it's because of his or her life.
Love it. Absolutely.
So thank you so much, Clint. And
Thank you,
I hope a
Laura.
lot of people reach out to you and get your book and connect with you. So blessings on you and your family.
Thank you.
What did you think of that? Pretty powerful stuff, wasn't it? Two things that really stood out to me was first, Clint realized how crucial it was going to be to make a decision to choose not to stay stuck in Gabriel's death, but to do what they could to honor his life. We know that doesn't mean not to grieve. That would be impossible. But we can choose to focus on what is missing and keep allowing ourselves to be held under for the long term, or we can choose to learn how to live a life of meaning and purpose that honors our child. It is possible to do, and that is a choice that we get to make at some point. The other thing is along that same line in how Clint and his wife have both given their pain a purpose. We do not want to let our child's life be wasted, which is pretty much what we're doing when we are determined to remain stuck in the darkness of their death. And I'll even gently say, playing the victim card. We want everyone around us to know that we are a victim of our child's death and how devastating that is. I remember when Becca died, that became my identity. I wanted to introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm Laura, and my daughter died." I wanted everybody to know what kind of pain I was in. And we do get to a point where we start choosing that instead of choosing life, and instead of choosing to honor our child's life. And I guess I feel that I need to maybe add one more thing that is important to remember, which is the fact that we are all on our own timeline. Remember, asking God why won't help. Asking Him how will. So do what you can to even ask God to help you to change your question if you feel stuck there. Be sure to ask God how to move through the painful darkness in the way that is best for you. If these weekly podcasts are a help to you, did you know you can also get a weekly email from me? It comes out each Wednesday, and it's called a Weekly Word of Hope. It has a word of encouragement, it lets you know of an event or a resource available, and it also lets you know the topic of each week's podcast. To start receiving it, just go to gpshope.org/hope. Just submit your name and your email address. We keep our email addresses private, and I rarely send out extra emails, so you don't have to worry about suddenly getting a bunch of spam emails. And you can easily unsubscribe when you no longer wish to receive them. That's gpshope.org/hope. Now, if you want a chance for something more up close and personal with myself and Dave, check out our itinerary and our events on the website. If you see we are traveling your direction, please reach out to us. Send us an email at office@gpshope.org. We would love to get together with you over a meal in our travels or come and visit your support group. So just go to gpshope.org and go to the events tab and check out how you can meet up with Dave and myself either on the road or come to one of our events. Let's go ahead to this week's birthday segment. Ava Shaw was born on February 4th and is forever 20. Brenton Smith was born on February 10th and is forever 24. We celebrate the day these two came into the world. It will forever be a special day for these families. If you would like to have your child's birthday shared with the other listeners, I would be honored to do that. All you have to do is go to gpshope.org/birthdays, fill out that form, submit the information, and I will announce your child's birthday the week of his or her birthday. And this will also automatically add you to start receiving the weekly Word of Hope emails if you aren't receiving those yet. I know we would all like to know why God allows such terrible things to happen. We might even ask, why did he even create this world, knowing how these corrupt, evil, and horrible things would happen? Why didn't he just start us out in heaven? Why do we have to live here first? Something I recently realized is that starting out in heaven is not a guarantee of anything either. I mean, look at Lucifer and 1/3 of the angels. They lived in God's glory. And they rebelled. They thought they could do things better. They wanted the attention that God was getting. So how can we really know how good God really is if we can't be touched by rebellion and evil? Am I making sense here? We can see the difference between good and evil. The angels, they didn't see that. All they saw was the goodness of God until Lucifer decided to do things his own way. And that's when there became a division of good and evil, because we get to see the difference between good and evil, and so we get to choose. And the question is, are we going to believe the same lies the enemy is still telling mankind that he did way back with Adam and Eve, that God is not good and he really doesn't care and he really doesn't mean what he says? God proved that is not the case by sending his own son to be one of us and to be sacrificed as the payment for your sin, for my sin, the sins of our children who are with him now. His son was beaten beyond recognition and then hung on an execution stake to take not just away our sin, but to take our guilt and our shame. God proved how good he is and how much he loves us by sending his son. And if you're doubting that, it means you are listening to the lies of the enemy, and you don't want to be on his playing field when you are in this much pain and vulnerable to his attacks. God is so good that he sent his son to die a torturous death so that we could be with our children beyond this earth, but forever. While we're still here without our children, we all can learn to live a life of meaning and purpose again. It might take a while, longer than you want it to or you think it should, but it can be done, and you're not alone. We are doing this together, so be sure to hold on. Pain eases. There is hope.